Hello world, welcome back to the PG.biz podcast with your hosts, me, Brian Baglow, and the ever wonderful Peggy Anne Salz. Hello Peggy, back from your travels once again, I see.
Yes, it has been a couple in a row, hasn't it? People are like, when do you ever work? But I do work. I work in between trips, but it's just been a great string of shows, you know? I was at Games Forum recently, and before that I was at MAU, and these are great shows to pick up guests because that's exactly what I do. You know, those long, eclectic talks late into the night, and then my radar goes on and it just sort of does this. It's like, yes, the guest radar is on.
This is it. You haven't put a foot wrong so far. Everybody that has come onto the show after you've been out there doing your international glamorous jet-setting reconnaissance, and so it is work, has been fantastic. But no pressure, Robert, no pressure at all, because this week we're joined by Mr. Robert Burnett, the COO of Hashbang Games. So welcome on board, Robert. A pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Brian. Nice to see you again, Peggy.
Great to see you. I mean, that's the result. We did have truly, and you'll do it now as well, Brian. It will be like a mind meld. I really enjoyed this because Robert lives at the intersection of games and entertainment. He has a lot of experience in the genres, in the platforms. He's all about convergence. In fact, I nicknamed him Mr. Medici, the Medici Man, because it's all at the intersection. You know, that's where everything happens at the intersection, on the fringe, all the creativity. And that's what it is. It's a cross-platform approach that is creative, but also lucrative. And we're going to find out how devs need to approach that because Robert knows it firsthand, right? Decades of experience, a stint at EA as an executive producer, a senior producer at Zynga, and a couple more stops along the way before taking the helm as COO of Hashbang, where you've been only since 2022, Robert, right?
Yeah, I've been full-time since 2022. I actually mentored the team for a few years before that. But what an exciting time it is in the industry right now. You're dead on, Peggy. There's so much opportunity. There's a lot of decisions people have to make. And I think spending the time to gather information and talk to people who have been there is really valuable to anybody that wants to be successful in this space.
We've been talking to a lot of people in various roles and various sort of organizations across not just the mobile games world, but the sort of the games world full stop. And so many of the most interesting conversations are happening at those points of convergence, you know, where games stop being, you know, playthings and really start to sort of rub shoulders with some of the other areas of our creative world. So I'm thrilled and delighted to have you here. So where did you get started? You know, we mentioned EA up front. Where did you get into the games industry, I guess, would be my first question.
I was so incredibly lucky. I grew up in San Jose, in the heart of what was to become Silicon Valley game industry. My mom actually went to school with Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs at Homestead High.
Wow.
She was not friends of theirs. She was taking night classes while they were there finishing up their high school. My dad knew executives that joined Apple when it first started. I had friends that were doing QA and internships at Atari on weekends. And the very first company I got to work at was Accolade, which was absolutely amazing because it was founded by some of the guys that founded the industry. You know, guys like Alan Miller, who had started Atari, left Atari to form Activision, left Activision to found Accolade. Just an incredible dedication to the space and so many great stories. And they were so eager to share their wisdom and help people grow up in the space.
So what was your role at EA? What were you working on?
So when I was at Accolade originally, I got an opportunity to move to San Diego and work for an emerging platforms team. It was called GTE Interactive Media. And it was a telecom. This is what is now known as Verizon. And they were making investments into entertainment technology. So they were working with Hollywood. They were working with video games. And when they shut down, there was an opportunity for a few of us to take some of the technology, form another business. And we started working with EA on the Tiger Woods franchise, really doing esports. So there was a product or a feature back then called Play with the Pros that allowed people who bought the retail product on the PC to go home and play Tiger Woods golf in real time against Tiger Woods when he was at the major tournaments. And it was sponsored by Buick and the people that were working on that. It wasn't a huge mass market, millions of people participating kind of a thing, but it was people who are interested in pushing the envelope and working in that space And working with that team was just such a blessing. It was just a great place to go.
Really, from the outset, you were there at the point of convergence where it was a game but not a game.
Building communities, figuring out ways to get people to socialize around interactive entertainment.
Fantastic. So you're very much ahead of its time.
Yes, yeah. The bleeding edge is what we referred to it. For a good decade, we were doing projects that were difficult to monetize, but we knew would eventually become a cornerstone of the market, like doing mobile development back in the early 2000s.
Let's fast forward to now and the opportunities for game developers in emerging platforms, games as a service, and tech are aligned with delivering, this whole notion of live ops. Is this where indies need to be? Do you think this is where more and more games are going to end up?
I don't think you could ignore it. If you were in the market 15 years ago, you couldn't get to retail without having the word multiplayer on the box. And then back then, less than 15% of the total market was even taking advantage of those features. Today, that's not the case. I would say closer to 100% of the products that go out across PC, mobile, and console have some form of online connectivity, whether it's for saving progress or connecting you to other players, or as deep as real-time cooperative or competitive real-time gaming. Yeah, when we were at EA, there's this term roll your own. And every time we wanted to add multiplayer features to a product, we were developing the tech stack. We were putting servers into server racks. We were worrying about what's the latency in Europe, on the East Coast, on the West Coast. And so one of the things that Hashbang got really good at about 5 years ago is we moved away from just looking at indie games, but looking at developing integrations into platforms as a service, where any indie developer didn't have to worry about having a 10-man dedicated team to multiplayer technology. They would connect to GameSparks or PlayFab or Beamable, and then use those services to provide some of the features that are only available to bigger studios.
Clearly, pretty advanced for the time. So you can say you knew it, you anticipated it, you saw this coming.
I have to give a lot of credit to Tom Casey, who was kind of mentor, partner, boss when we were forming all the small studios in Carlsbad. He's currently at Warner Brothers doing some exciting work. But one of the things that we were talking about, we weren't just talking about how people were going to play against or with each other, but how the different platforms were going to contribute to this convergence. And at the time, there was no mobile platform yet. We had console, we had PC, and people were playing differently on those two platforms. But one of the things that we did when we looked ahead is we said, look, when mobile first comes to market, we're not going to be playing the exact same way on mobile that we play on PC or console. What about puzzle games? What about game shows? And so Tom Casey chased that and actually got a meeting with Dick Clark. And this was, again, another opportunity for convergence between the video game industry and the entertainment industry. Hollywood was very eager at figuring out how to do interactive right, because at that point in the early 90s, there had been some missteps. And not everybody understood how movies and video games were going to come together. And we went down and met with Dick in Burbank, and he introduced us to reality TV. And we talked about game shows, and we talked about the shows that were coming over from Europe, like Bachelor and Survivor. And that set us off on another adventure of developing a different type of more game showy experience, casual entertainment, that would appeal to a new group of people that wanted to play video games.
I think it has taken quite some time for companies to really get to grips with the reality rather than just, license IP back and forth. So it sounds like you guys were really very much at the forefront if you were exploring reality TV, game shows, etc., all the way back then.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that's different about today is when I was coming up in the game industry, we would eagerly await the next generation of hardware. And every 4 years, we'd see a cycle. And when the new hardware would come out, it would enable new genres of gameplay in interactive entertainment. It went from 2D to arcade at home, to 3D games, with texture maps and these amazing materials and physically based rendering. And then we've got 3D acceleration. But back then, the platforms all played very differently. You played different games on a PC than you played on a console. And then when mobile emerged, mobile was puzzle games, and that was it. And then you fast forward to today, and your average next-gen phone that's coming out, really any high-end phone that's released in the last 2 years, has got the same rendering power as an Xbox 360 or a PS3. And so we now have the ability, if it's appropriate, to introduce the exact same experience on a PC, on a console, on mobile, And this is one of the things that the indie studios have to struggle with.
It does open up an awful lot of new opportunities for developers, but at the same time, as you just said, it challenges you to think, so what's appropriate? What is the experience I want to create here? What is it that we can do, meaningfully on each of these devices?
Absolutely. And then you start introducing new technologies that independent gamers have to get themselves comfortable with, like analytics and telemetry and user acquisition. I think another one of the important bridges that occurred within the industry is, 20 years ago, product was retail. So everything was fire and forget. It was development team working for 2 years, putting a product in the box, and it went to the shelf. And then the game would launch and the customers would come in and play it, and they'd have opinions and great ideas and feedback, but very few teams had an opportunity to take that feedback and contribute that back into the product. The majority of the games did not see a version 2 or a version 3. Now you fast forward to today, where games as a service is the rule. You don't release a product without thinking about how you're going to live op or operate that game once it releases. And so for a developer, especially independent developers, that's so exciting because you're now bringing your baby to market and sharing it with the world. And you have to be ready to listen to what your gamers say, look at the data, fix things before they complain about it in the form of an Apple Store review or a Google Store review, and really stay on top of that curve. And so I think, another one of those off-the-shelf technologies independent studios need to pay attention to are the analytic platforms that allow them to see in real time what feature releases are working or not working, so they can correct issues or take advantage of opportunities before they turn into complaints from the community.
You make the point, it's really about getting those components that are off the shelf and still innovating with them. You started with analytics. I mean, I'd like to hear maybe a few more, because the whole idea is indies need to be here. But again, it's about putting these components together in a way that they make business sense, as well as being really creative and standing out.
So it's much easier to get something out there, but you still have to have a plan and a vision for who your customer is going to be. And you have to figure out technically how is it that you're going to deploy this, and then pay attention to what's going on in real time once you hit the market. So, platforms like PlayFab and Beamable and ByteBrew all give game development studios an opportunity to get the advantage of technology that would have taken a larger studio, a team of 10 to 20 people, to put together and maintain. Well, indie studios can now get this in some cases for free on small projects and get started with it. So I would absolutely encourage anybody out there listening who's interested in bringing a game to market, whether it be on any of the platforms, if you're an indie studio, get familiar with these platforms and figure out which one's going to be right for you.
Let's look at Hashbang specifically, because this is very clearly based on experience. Tell us more about the studio and how you guys have applied this.
Yeah, so Hashbang was founded by Marco Williams, who's my partner there, and he had this little studio. He was working for me at a game company down in Carlsbad, and they were scaling down, and so he took a job with a company called PlayFab, and PlayFab got acquired by Microsoft. So PlayFab was formed from a bunch of guys who had experience creating tech stack for the Xbox. And so he was able to go from the perspective of running a small indie studio into running a backend service into working for one of the largest publishers in the world, developing that service to other titles. And so seeing the difference in scale from working with an indie to then integrating that technology into Minecraft and Gears of War and Halo, he was able to get a much bigger picture of what the market was going to need. And he was super excited about getting back to his roots. So he left Microsoft, came back to Hashbang full time. And we really started at that time focusing on platform integration for other studios. So we worked with mid-sized companies that wanted platform integration. Even some of the AAAs were moving away from having internal teams that created all those services to using services like PlayFab and Beamables to provide scale to their products, because they had very targeted solutions that scaled very nicely. They'd solved that issue, and they provided some additional enhancements in the form of features like leaderboards and matchup and multiplayer, real-time analytics, database access, stat tracking. And so the industry started moving to being more comfortable with some of those back-end services. And then we got to the point where we're like, look, one of the big problems you have in the game industry, if you're creating technology independent of an actual experience, you can start developing technology for technology's sake and not really solving real problems. And so what I've seen is that when you force a team to also integrate that technical solution into an experience, you start solving for a real world use case, and you become that much better on both sides of the fence. You're better at making the games, you're better at creating the technology. And so we decided to make an investment about 16 months ago in creating the game Light Violence that hopefully we've got some video to share with.
We do indeed, Robert, because you gave it to us, and that's a great segue because exactly that. Walk us through that, because it's not just the game itself, it's what you've put into practice in your game. You know, it is about applying the advice you've been giving us throughout the show. So tell us about how this is reflected in the gameplay.
Yeah, so there were a couple things. This actually started as a technical demo for Beamable, where they wanted to go to GDC and they wanted to show off some technology. And the team fell in love with the project. And we went back and said, look, we'd really like to own this and turn this into a real game. And they were very supportive. We've got a great relationship with them. And so what started as a technical proof of concept turned into a passion project for the team. So Light Violence is a social game. It's got a very strong collaborative element. It's meant to be short duration, so you don't need to sit down and commit to 1 to 2 hours to play this. It plays like a game show. It feels a little bit more open world, and we have the ability to do combat. And so we've got a very kind of light-hearted Ratchet and Clank style combat system, but it starts with 50 people and it whittles down to 32, and then you get the final 16. And it's been a real challenge to figure out how to make that work for PC, console, and mobile. But we're really happy with what we've got to share today.
And in prep, you talked to me about a little bit of a scoop as well related to this game. What's that about?
Yeah, now it comes out. Okay, so I mean, if you look at those products, you know, one of the things that's really strong about all of them is the fact that they have kind of this, you can jump in anytime and leave anytime aspect. And there isn't a necessity to really follow the storyline. So a lot of them haven't worried about investing in any real storyline, and we've taken a slightly different approach. And so not only do we have the traditional multiplayer game where you can collect skins and upgrade your weapons, but we've actually bled in a little bit of a story element. So one of the things that we've done that's a little bit unique, you kind of look at the human race as being this planet that is composed of multiple tribes. And people come into an experience with a slightly different perspective. And I think we all work hard to kind of figure out how to communicate with each other. Well, we kind of developed a universe that has the same approach, where the universe is composed of a bunch of different tribes. And it turns out that the backstory includes Earth as being kind of one of the first places where those tribes coexisted. And so we've got some hidden elements, kind of very similar to Ready Player One, where as you're playing the game, you'll have these little unlocks, and those unlocks will make doors that were previously unopenable, and you can tease out some of the story as you're playing the game.
I do love a bit of lore, I have to be honest. But
yeah.
So tell me, Robert, you've worked on the publishing and development side of things, and that covers a huge amount of ground, more so now than ever. How's that reflected in the game and your approach to making games for your audience?
Well, I'll tell you, that creates a bit of a challenge. You know, we're a development studio. We're relatively small. There are plenty of small studios that are launching products. But one of the things to keep in mind as an indie studio, you really have to understand whether or not you want to be responsible for self-publishing on top of ongoing development. So as an indie studio, even Hashbang is struggling with this a bit. You know, we've got a product that is mobile and it's PC and it's console. And a lot of the publishers are targeted. A lot of publishers that only want to be in the console space, they do not want to be in mobile. There are mobile publishers that understand the mobile space and they're comfortable with that. They do not want to go into console because console's perceived as being very high dollar target, very marketing heavy, expensive to penetrate. I think it's a little bit easier for an indie studio to develop something and move through a digital store. And I would encourage all of you guys to look into that because developing and publishing your own product does give you the ability to talk directly to the customers and gather that information and embed that back into the product. So that's one of the things that we're kind of working through right now, trying to figure out publishing strategy. There's a lot of opportunity out there, and you just have to talk to people and figure out what's going to be the right mix for your product.
Be brave, be bold. But also, to that point, you know, it's exciting at the intersection. That's how we got into our conversations. Like everything happens at that connection, at that intersection. Cool things happen, but also, yes, you can be a category creator or bring things together like you have, mobile, console, PC, but also there's the danger of being too unique, too much, a little bit too fringe. How is that possible that indies can best do this, but then avoid being too niche at the same time?
I think one of the advantages that indies have over the big AAA studios is that the big AAA studios are going to make big, bold bets. They're going to spend $50 to $100 million on IP plus development plus marketing. But there is an encumbrance that comes with that. There's a level of effort. There's a minimum level of effort that's required. There's a tremendous amount of synchronization that is required for getting product to market and timing when you're going to go out. There's a huge amount of competition for the primary launch windows, like Christmas. And I think as an indie studio, you can be much more nimble. It's important not to overcommit. Pick something small that you want to be really, really good at. Create a tone and a sound and an audience for your product. Also, what I just talked about, when you're doing development, understand the pain points of the publishing organizations, understand what it means to do user acquisition and to have a relationship with the press, and figure out how you're going to present yourself on your webpage and get information on the game out there. But as a smaller studio, you've got a lot more flexibility. You don't have to wait for Christmas to release your title. You can release your title at the beginning of summer, the middle of summer, or in October, as opposed to waiting for November and Black Friday. And I think that's where the indie space needs to be comfortable living. You don't want to go heads up against the big whales in the industry. You want to figure out a way to swim around them.
You said it yourself. It's about looking at all the alternatives. So I was thinking about what I just came back with from the shows I attended, right? And there was so much buzz about the opportunities in alternative app stores. We're not there yet, but I'm going to make a guess, Robert, that you're going to say, yes, be bold, be brave, do it, guys. Or are you not?
I would say absolutely take a look at it. Remember, your goal in creating a product is finding a market for that product. One of the things that you will learn as an independent studio is the industry is global today. When I came into the industry, 95% of the revenue was being generated in North America. It's now 50-50. So roughly 50% of the entertainment dollars come from North America. The other 50 come from the rest of the globe. But they don't monetize the exact same way. You may get a very sizable dedicated player base in Brazil, but they're not buying the exact same items that they're buying in North America. You also have to pay attention to the way you localize your product. You can absolutely launch an English-only product globally, and you'll see some success, but you'll see more success if you can figure out how to communicate natively to people in these large markets. So there's plenty of data out there available through Google searches to find out what are the major gaming markets, to find out which ones are monetizing well and which ones are not monetizing well. And then understanding on the day that you want to bring your product to market, who is it that you want to reach? Do you want to focus exclusively on North America because you're a smaller team and localization scares you? Or do you want to find a localization partner or research how to do it yourself and then figure out how to introduce your product to some of these markets in native language?
What I like about you, you're edgy and you're educational. So I want you to do that. Give us tough love for our audience, right? I'm thinking brutal advice that they have to hear based on what you're talking about understanding the platforms, using the platforms, even some shortcuts around the platforms and how to use them, how to integrate them, because that's what you're doing. So yes, tough love. Let's hear it. The
toughest thing for an independent development team to do is to stay focused. You need to have a very clear vision of what it is that you want to create and who you want to create it for. It's very easy to get into a product and realize that the market is shifting and that you have to make some adjustments. But those adjustments should get smaller and smaller the closer you get to your delivery date. And you want to focus on that target date. It is so important to create games and create experiences and get them in the hands of the people that are going to play them and appreciate them as quickly as possible. Because that's when you know whether or not you've got something that's really going to stick with your audience. So one of the other things that I've seen has been a challenge is a lot of times what we try and do is we split two genres. So we'll say, oh, I really love fighting games. No, I really love poker. I'm going to create a poker fighting game. And you have to pay attention to whether or not the intersection of those two genres creates a union, which will create appeal to poker players and to fighting game players, or if you're going to create an intersection. And if there isn't much overlap and the only people who care about your game is this very small intersection, you may have a trouble monetizing and finding an audience big enough to justify the development that you put into the product. I think, when you look at things that feel very experimental, Cuphead comes to mind, which is an absolutely beautiful product. And it shows a tremendous amount of passion and focus. They knew what they wanted to create. They worked incredibly hard on it, brought it to market, and really did something different from what everybody else was doing at the time, and created a unique indie-esque experience. And I think that's a great model for other indie studios to follow. But yeah, understanding enough about your market to really believe that the union of the different ideas you're creating is going to be large enough to justify the passion you want to put into it is probably the one thing that you have to pay attention to throughout the project.
So we have two questions that we ask everyone who comes onto the podcast, Robert.
Okay.
First is, favorite game of all time, and second, what are you playing right now?
Okay, the easy one is what I'm playing right now. I am still playing Fortnite. The thing that I think is interesting about Fortnite, I was playing since the very beginning of the Battle Royale game. And so seeing how that game has changed and reinvented itself to stay relevant to the people that still want to play it. Obviously, there's been a lot of competition. You've seen people pulled off into Apex, Call of Duty, obviously, that's been a big player in that space. So seeing what they do to kind of morph their market, how they interact with entertainment brands, a lot of collaboration between Epic and Hollywood on different movie franchises, game franchises, John Wick, Avengers, etc. So I think that's exciting, and seeing what works and what doesn't work relative to the community. It's a great little petri dish to kind of observe and learn from. Game that I've loved more than anything. I will go back a few years and say the game that I was really, really passionate about was the RTS genre, so StarCraft and Command and Conquer. And
great choices. Personal favorites.
Those games were amazing. The thing that became a struggle is I became a parent in the middle of that market upheaval. And being a dad to a 2-year-old is not conducive with being able to allocate 2 hours to play a video game. And so, I gravitated to things that offered, competition, collaboration, but didn't require me to sit down and commit 120 minutes to gameplay. So I kind of missed that genre because I don't see any great players in that space right now. But I'm really hoping that somebody appears soon and we can all take advantage of that and enjoy it.
Robert, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. We'll have to get you back on again, find out more about the new game and how it's been performing.
Yes, Robert, just again, thank you so much. And I know we will be continuing our conversation because that's what we said when we met. We said this is ongoing, and absolutely, it's a date to bring you back once you tell us a little bit more about your game. So thanks for the advice and thanks for the inspiration as well. Great to have you.
Absolutely. Nice to see you again, Peggy. Nice to meet you, Brian. And we'll have some videos up on YouTube for the people that didn't get to see what we had to share today.
This show is all about how to do your job better, how to make an amazing game, how to market it, and you have a say. So if you have a story or know someone we need to shine a light on, then we would love to hear from you.
We want to hear from you. We want to reflect the reality of the mobile games market in all its wonderful complexity and strangeness. So if you have any suggestions for us, if you have any feedback for us, you can always get in touch. You can email us at podcast@pocketgamer.biz. You can find us on Twitter @PGBiz, and you can reach out to us through the pocketgamer.biz website. If you're interested in listening to all of our podcasts, you can find them at pocketgamer.biz/podcast, and we would love to hear your thoughts on future shows.
And we've got you covered on all the major platforms, so subscribe to the audio podcast, as Brian said. Look for us on YouTube. If you want to read it, hey, you can do that too, because we have a companion post for you as well on the pocketgamer.biz website.
Tune in again for the next edition of the pocketgamer.biz podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you in the near future. Until then, I'm Brian Baglow.
I'm Peggy Anne Salz, and that's a wrap until next week.